was great. And I'll probably be talking more about kind of what Rabble is and what we've tried to do on numerous circumstances. A little bit about me, just to start off with. My career has mostly been in the mainstream, and sort of the left-wing mainstream in the UK, if you like. I was staff at The Guardian and stuff like that. I've been covering protests since 1989 in the UK, poll tax riots and things like that. And so I kind of brought that into Rabble when I started with them about 9 months ago. The Olympics began 2 weeks after I started with Rabble, so I didn't have, a lot of our coverage was already in place. And until that point, I had been on the other side of the fence, working for the Globe and Mail and CTV and other people, trying to find difficult stories and also being told about the positive message that we were meant to cover as well. We can talk about that during questions, because that's not really why I'm here. But Rabble kind of came out of protest. I mean, it's almost 10 years old, and the reason it was started in the first place was because of the America Summit in Quebec City in 2001. And so April next year will be 10 years old. And the protests sort of led to, I think, a lot of impromptu meetings with activists and progressive journalists covering that event, and they really just wanted to create a way of getting different viewpoints and different versions of what they saw was happening out. And I think Rabble's tried to follow that route ever since. What they grounded it around was what we call Babel, which is our sort of open forum discussion setup where people can bring in subjects and discuss it and trade information and argue their heads off and all sorts of other things. It's one of the things that makes it a dynamic news website. We also, if you're not familiar with us, we also cover features and news. We have what we call Rabble TV, which is to promote video and other types of video. And then we have our podcast section, which is Rabble Radio. And we bring in our own original content, and we also will share content and bring in stories that have already been published elsewhere. Just for those who don't know us, in September we had 125,000 unique visitors to the website. We have 85,000 websites linked to us. Last 2 years we were nominated for 3 Canadian Online Publishing Awards for news and also for the website itself. So that's just kind of us. What we try to do is provide an alternative perspective. So we'll be commenting on the mainstream issues that a lot of the rest of the media cover. Often we will be bringing in voices that wouldn't necessarily, under normal circumstances, get into the mainstream press. And as you may be able to tell as I progress, I like to have a dialogue rather than give a speech, so I hope to get lots of questions from you in a minute. I was writing down some of the questions that have been asked about the shortcomings of the mainstream media. I'll probably talk more about the G20 coverage because I was sitting in a coffee shop in Richmond basically monitoring the events as they unfolded with the mass arrests and everything, trying to support from British Columbia 25 journalists in Toronto, about 10 who are actually inside the summit, and about 15 or so who were outside on the streets, who hadn't managed to gain accreditation, and trying to balance that out. Now, the big noise of the mass arrests and the significance of it is still unfolding. I think people agree. There's more information about $100 pens and things like that is coming out, policing costs. We'll still be learning more about that, and Rabble's been covering it pretty much nonstop since before it started, and we will continue to do so. But also looking at what the mainstream journalists had or had not been doing, a lot of these people vacated the area before arrests started happening. I don't know offhand whether they were told to get out of there by their editors or they just scarpered. I thought it was the most appalling lack of news judgment on top of everything else, that they weren't even there to witness what was going on, a lot of them. And the ones that stayed, a lot of them were arrested. The Guardian's blogger, Jesse Rosenfeld, was arrested, and a few others. Our own blogger, Ben Palace, was arrested. And you know, life continued. They got out and they were able to write about it later, and they still are. Our own, we had a blogger. We have a blogger called Crystalline Krauss, who's based in Toronto, and her main project from before the G20 started and continues through to this day is really just recording all these various things, the summary arrests that took place of activists before the G20 actually began, and obviously the continuing arrests of some of these people. Some of them are still in prison. She writes about that frequently. On the day, she herself was not arrested. However, she was detained by police and asked whether or not the stories that we were running on Rabble, and we were very active with twittering information about what was happening in different spots at that time. They were obviously monitoring it pretty carefully because they asked her if we were sending out messages to the protesters, which kind of said to me an awful lot about the general attitude to dissenting media by, I guess, the police, among other people, because it wouldn't have been just the police that would have been coming to that conclusion, I don't think. I mean, my approach generally is to shine a light, and Rabble tries to be a broad left, left of center media outlet. There's not much of that in Canada. There's lots of really good small ones across the country, and we try to connect with people where we can to get their stories out as well, so that, you know, someone in Saskatchewan can read about what's happening in Nova Scotia, because this is such an enormous place, and there is a lot of dissent from a lot of different specters. And just go to page 2. Along with Crystaline's coverage, some of the stuff that we also wrote about included, there was a big Massey Hall event by the Council of Canadians who brought in speakers. We ran that live. We were breaking stories like the fact that children would be detained by child services if their parents were arrested. That doesn't seem to have happened, but we wanted to make sure that that got out ahead of time, and it wasn't very, it was covered a little bit, but not a great deal. At the same time, we're talking about protest. I mean, I think that most of us who are running media, we try to explain that the protest doesn't just stop when people leave the streets. So we're trying to bring out analysis, critiques, and things like that, and news coverage that will show that actually protest is up here as well, and people are having a dialogue when they read these stories. It's not just about having a problem on the day. The problem continues after that. And to that end, I also just wanted to add that we didn't want to ignore the summit. We had people inside. They were people. Some of them were accredited with us, and also representatives of NGOs who knew a great deal about specific issues and would write for us about them. So we were trying to balance out what was being said by making sure that it wasn't press release stuff, which is a lot of what was being cranked out by the summit. And we wanted to make sure that the story of what was happening on the streets of Toronto was properly covered, but also the fact that these things that were being passed within the summit that will affect millions of people elsewhere in the world are also being critiqued. So that's kind of the balance we tried to strike and continue to strike as they are moving on to Korea with their G20 circus. The alternative and independent media rewriting the story. Well, there's a kind of black hole in coverage, and I see it as a journalist, I see it as an opportunity to find stories. And quite frankly, a big chunk of my job is to deal with people who want to write for us, to find out what their stories are, and I get overwhelmed. I'm dealing with about 100 emails a day. There's a huge need for people to have this dialogue because, okay, journalism is meant to be that. And I'm not short of these people and their voices and their very good experiences coming to me. I consider it I'm very fortunate that way. The protests, yeah, I think I've already said this, it doesn't begin and end with people on the streets, and that's kind of generally my approach to it. Tons more, and everybody else needs a chance, so thanks very much.